fundamental issue now before our people can be stated briefly. It is, are the American people fit to govern themselves, to rule themselves, to control themselves? I believe they are. My opponents do not.
I believe in the American Constitution. I favor the American system of individual enterprise. I am in favor of protection. I believe in the permanent court and further limitation of armament. I am opposed to aggressive war.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Whether we shape the future in the image of our hopes is ours is to determine by our actions and our choices. If we succeed, generations to come will say of us now living that we mastered our moment.
Americanism, not globalism, will be our credo.
Leading the right out of the ashes. This is The Right Take.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome, one and all, to episode number 73 here of The Right Take. I'm Eric Lendrum, here with my co-host, as always, Jacob Grandstaff, and we are still continuing full speed ahead, damn the torpedoes, with our elections-themed coverage here of The Right Take from now until November. And the last round of primaries we had, with 5 different states voting on Tuesday of last week, it can't be said enough. There were so many incredible victories for the America First movement, for pro-Trump candidates and Trump-endorsed candidates in crucial swing states. But there were some other states that you would think are less competitive, but nevertheless had interesting results, shall we put it that way, that must be talked about, including, if it needs to be said, there was one major loss that happened on Tuesday, a loss for the conservative movement, a loss for the American right. What was it? Well, we will talk about it right here and now in episode 73. It's coming from the state of Kansas, of all places. And it just so happens that there is a friend of the show, a frequent guest, a favorite of you guys, a fan favorite, if you will, of the guests we have had on, who is also a resident of the state of Kansas. And he is going to break down these elections for us today. The founder, the commander-in-chief of Valiant News, Tom Pappert. Tom, welcome back to The Right Take.
It's great to be back, Eric. I hope I can assuage some concerns the listeners might have about my humble state here in Kansas. I don't think it's as doom and gloom as you guys make it out to be.
Right. It's definitely something that on its face it looks really bad, but if anything, it could maybe be taken as a learning moment for the right moving forward for such an important issue. Before we get to the big marquee contest there, let's go ahead and summarize real quick. Let's just knock out this child's play of some of the statewide elections besides this one big ballot measure that are worth talking about. So, of course, we have the governor's race there, where incumbent Democrat Laura Kelly is up for re-election this year. And Trump's endorsement, incumbent Attorney General Derek Schmidt, won the Republican nomination to oppose her. So, Tom, as a resident of Kansas, what do you think about this upcoming election in November? Do you think there's a chance that we could flip that seat red?
Well, so Kansas is a weird state. The political consultant class can't figure it out. The Beltway people can't figure it out. I can't figure it out, frankly, half the time, and I was born here and live here. But since like 1920, Kansas has this weird habit, the voters do, where we give the Democrat 8 years in the governor's mansion, then we kick out the party and we give the Republican 8 years in the governor's mansion. And this has been going on basically for about as long as we've been a state. We became a state in the 1860s or whatever. So this is a very strange precedent. I couldn't understand why Kobach was going to try to run in 2018. I'm a big fan of his. I couldn't understand for the life of me why he thought that we would get 2 Republican administrations back to back. It seemed so far-fetched. And then he lost, and the establishment has used that against him in every subsequent race he's won. I really hope he wins the race he's running for now. I believe it's Attorney General. But what we saw in that governor primary race is incumbent Laura Kelly, who has tried her best to be a less attractive Gretchen Whitmer since the beginning of COVID-19. She's compared herself to Jesus Christ and said that she knows the best for Kansas businesses and individuals. It's been an absolute catastrophe for her. And we saw her get, last I checked, around 250,000 votes. She had a challenger from the left who I think got another 14,000 votes. So you're talking 275,000 votes for an incumbent Democrat who has been getting a ton of support. She goes on CNN. She's getting tons of money to fund her campaign with, versus the Republican side with a little bit more crowded field. But I believe Derek Schmidt had something like 300,000 votes. If you add up everybody else who was on the ballot, it comes to about 350, 360,000. So I think that this could be the first year in 100 plus years that Kansas is going to kick a party out of the government mansion instead of a governor's mansion, rather than give them a full 2 terms. And it's interesting. I've heard all kinds of rumors that Kelly was not even going to be on the ticket because things are getting so bad for her. I heard that from top level sources from here within the state who are very in tune with the Kansas Republican Party and Democratic Party and what's going on in Topeka. And they're all flabbergasted and shocked. Everybody thought that they were going to give Laura Kelly the same treatment that Obama gave Kathleen Sebelius back in 2008. Kathleen Sebelius was our last Democratic governor. She had 2 full terms, but by the end of the second term, things were not going well for her. So Obama airlifted her out, made her the fall guy for Obamacare when it started to fall apart at the seams, and that's how everybody remembers her. Well, I heard it was going to be the same thing for Laura Kelly. I heard she was going to do something in the Department of the Interior. Didn't wind up doing it. I think she's going to have a very, very tough re-election. I don't know what she could do. She's legalized sports betting to try to be more popular. There's rumors they're going to figure out how to legalize weed to make her more popular. I'm not sure anything can do it, though, after the first term in office she's had.
Well, that is definitely I think an optimistic outlook overall. Again, in any other state, certainly a state like Kansas and the area, you would think, oh yeah, this should be a slam dunk. It would be like a repeat of Kentucky, where the current governor there, the Democrat, Andy Beshear, only narrowly won because the previous incumbent, the Republican incumbent he beat, was so unpopular. He had like some scandals going on or something. So surely next year, because Kentucky is an off-year state, they have their elections in 2023, then surely Kentucky will flip back red. So, but knowing that interesting trend, that interesting pattern Kansas always has, that's you could say when it comes to governor's races, it's basically a bellwether state in that sense. But I think that's very encouraging, and that's definitely a state that's one governor's race that's worth keeping an eye on. And of course, you mentioned him by name earlier. I was going to talk about it as well. Chris Kobach, the absolutely based former Secretary of State of Kansas, who ran for governor, narrowly lost, ran for Senate, didn't win the nomination, and now is the nominee to succeed Derek Schmidt as the new Attorney General. Do you think Kobach's going to win that race, Tom?
He's won statewide elections in Kansas before. He's got great name recognition, and everybody who is, I would say, a normal person here in Kansas really likes him. He was one of the main guys who made immigration such a national story, and he did that while serving in the state of Kansas, which really elevated Kansas in the eyes of a lot of Republicans. So I think that he is going to win. I think the only reason why he lost the primary election to run for U.S. Senate last go-around in 2020 was because Mitch McConnell was playing favorites and spending dark money. This is just my belief, evidenced by the fact that there was tons of dark money spent and the ad campaigns all look just like Mitch McConnell's. I think Kobach is going to win. I think he'll be a great attorney general, and I got a soft spot in my heart for the guy. I think he's a really good person. I don't think he's a very polished politician. He's a very good lawyer, maybe, but I think that he is a real human being just like the rest of us, and I've had one-on-one conversations with him where he will be very, very candid, and I think he'll win. I hope he'll win. I see no chance that the Democrats are going to like have a big showing at the state level. They may keep the governor's mansion just because Kansas is weird like that, but in every other sense, I don't see how the guy can lose.
Well, that brings us to another point, is because obviously we lost big on the abortion vote, and you mentioned that you don't see the Democrats being able to come up with enough votes to beat Kobach and beat Schmidt. But whenever you break down the vote, you see that the number of votes that voted against Value Them Both amendment does not match with the number of votes that voted for these Democratic candidates. So maybe you can, I know this is kind of jumping into the abortion discussion, but unless there's anything else that Eric that you wanted to add about the race itself, maybe you could elaborate on that those numbers don't add up.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to say, just to summarize again for our viewers, since we're diving right into this, again, the main issue that was on the ballot, the big ballot initiative is in Kansas this year on the primary day, was something called the Value Them Both Amendment. And basically what this amendment would do is, apparently in Kansas' state constitution, feel free to chime in here, Tom, with the accurate history, it's apparently abortion is a guaranteed right in the Kansas state constitution that was implemented, I think, in 2019, so under Laura Kelly, of course. And this amendment would have basically repealed that amendment and said abortion is not a state constitutionally protected right, and it gives the state legislature authority to pass bans, like the kind of bans you're seeing, the trigger laws and whatnot, they're being passed all over the country right now after the Roe v. Wade decision. So this is being widely touted as the first big test of abortion as an election year issue after Roe v. Wade. And I believe the margin was 58 to 42% who voted against the measure, which the measure, had it passed, would have repealed the abortion right. Or made it possible for the state legislature to repeal abortion. So a 16-point margin of defeat on a pro-life issue in an ostensibly red state like Kansas. That's being widely touted as a defeat for the right. And, of course, the media is just drooling over like, this is proof that abortion will save the Democrats in 2022. So many different narratives here. Tom, feel free to break it down now from your perspective on the ground.
Well, they have certainly been talking about Kansas a whole lot. Again, it's interesting how they talk about that, and not that the Republicans had 100,000 more votes in the primary than the Democrats did. But the first thing to understand about the Value Them Both amendment is when the average voter got to the polls, they got the most I don't know if there's ever been a ballot initiative more confusing than this. Because if you ask me, Tom, do you support abortion? Yes or no? I'm going to say no 10 times out of 10. Mm-hmm. But when you get to the polls and you see the little ballot, a yes vote for the Value Them Both amendment means yes, I don't want abortion. A no vote means no, I do want abortion. So it was confusing on its face to start. The Republican Party did not do a good job of getting the message out on that. The only people I really saw trying to get the messaging out were the Catholic Church, the diocese here in my neck of the woods. Nobody else even gave it a shot. Even my church. I mean, I hate to throw them under the bus, but they mentioned it like once the Sunday before the election day, and there was nothing else. There was no big concerted effort from the Kansas Republican Party. We certainly did not receive any help from any of the National Republican Party, even our elected leaders here. I didn't see Roger Marshall, our U.S. Senator, out there telling people about it. I didn't see Jerry Moran telling people about it. I didn't see Ron Estes telling people about it. The only person I did see was the wife of ex-Representative Tim Hulskamp was talking about it quite a bit. That was it. So there was very little massive get out the vote initiative, I would say. The other part of this is the massive protests, the vandalism and theft of signs that was happening in a otherwise normally quiet Midwestern state where you don't see a lot of crime unless George Floyd gets killed. We don't usually have protests. But every single weekend for the past 6 or so weeks, all across downtown Wichita, the biggest population city in Kansas, you saw these protesters. And it looked like, I mean, I don't think they bust them in or anything. I think they're domestic. But they looked exactly like the big 350-pound women you see at the Women's March every year. So there was some, and I thought maybe that would help us. That's why I was being maybe we do have a chance. But there's some history that people don't know about Kansas as well. We, of course, are unfortunately the home to, I guess it's the Phelps family, the God Hates F Words group up there in Topeka. So there is a lot of, oh boy, we can't be confused with those people.
Westboro Baptist Church, that's right. Yes.
That's right. That's right. We've also had in my city, an abortionist was shot dead at a Sunday church service about 10 years ago. His name was, I think, George Tiller. People were very spooked after that happened, thinking, oh, my God, are we going to be like, is this going to be bleeding Kansas from 200 years ago? What is happening? And then just an optics thing that's been going on since before I was alive. We have another church group. I won't say their name, but they would protest abortion. And what they would do is they would have their 3- and 4-year-old children lay on the ground in the parking lot of the Planned Parenthood or whatever the abortion clinic was, which tells passersby, hey, wait a minute. So you're saying that life is sacred in the womb, but you're going to get your toddler killed to express that? So the abortion is a very weird issue in Kansas. We've had murders. We've had very stupid pro-life protesters going out there and doing a terrible job of representing the brand. And then we had a ballot initiative that made absolutely no sense. Yes means I don't want abortion. No means yes, I do want abortion. I was not surprised. I was predicting in the days and weeks before the initiative, before Tuesday, that it was probably not going to pass, but the Republicans were otherwise going to have a very good night. And that's exactly what happened. I hate to be so flippant about it because obviously I'm pro-life and obviously I believe that I wish it would have passed. But knowing all the background of Kansas, knowing that we have a Democrat, Laura Kelly, in office, and that happens every 16 years, we get a new one or whatever, I was not shocked and I was not surprised. I was a little bit surprised to see exactly what kind of victory the Democrats were going to try to make this out to be at the national level. And I'm hoping that their joy will turn to ashes in their mouth this November when the Republicans have another strong showing and kick that gremlin Laura Kelly out of Topeka.
Yeah, I certainly can't wait for that. The idea of, especially in Kansas, like you said, they had this big abortion victory, and they turn around and lose anyway, just proving that it meant absolutely nothing. That would definitely be just in typical style of the Democrats.
My final thing I have to say, the funding for the pro-abortion side was so insane. We had nothing on our end.
It was like 2-1, right?
Yeah, I could not watch a YouTube video. You can't turn on local television. You can open your smartphone and go on Facebook without seeing pro-abortion ads run. It was, and there's some of the most disingenuous stuff you could ever believe. The text messaging campaigns were absolutely ridiculous, where they were telling people that a vote no is in fact the pro-life position. It was some of the most dishonest electioneering I've ever seen in my life. And, of course, because it's Kansas, nobody talks about it, and the Democrats get what they want. And they always do this, by the way. Final thing, then I'll shut up for a second. In 2018, it must have been, we had a House seat come up. We needed to replace a U.S. representative. And the Democrats found this guy named Thompson. They spent, I believe the number was $6 million trying to arrest him. There's only 2 million people in the state of Kansas. And they lost by like 15 points, and it was Ron Estes, and Ron Estes has held the seat ever since. So the Democrats are perfectly willing and able to pump money into this poor state whenever they think they can get a win, and this is the first win they've had as long as I've been watching them.
Well, you brought up the ads, and I read this in Washington Monthly this morning. It's the name of this article is "The Ads That Won the Kansas Abortion Referendum," and it points out, 5 different ads. And they pointed out that all these groups that were spending all this money in Kansas, they were trying to persuade middle-of-the-road voters. They weren't necessarily trying to gin up the progressive vote because they know there aren't enough progressives in Kansas to win the day for them. So they were running things like one brought on a doctor who was pointing out that, I took an oath to do no harm. If a woman's health or life is in danger, I have to abort the baby in order to avoid doing harm to the woman. This woman who had a baby that threatened her life, she was saying, if this amendment passes, then Kansas might pass a law that will end up allowing women like me to have to die because they can't remove the fetus. And they also really focused on government control. They were trying to aim for the libertarians. And this is one area where I think they actually succeeded in pulling a lot of independents and libertarian-minded people over, because even most libertarians, if you break down the issue to them, they're somewhat pro-life. And basically they won the ad war, and because they were able to appeal to middle-of-the-road voters. And one thing that Washington Monthly, we'll link in the description, one thing that this article points out is that if progressives saw these ads, they weren't very happy with it, because a lot of the arguments that these ads were making were actually appealing to pro-lifers, like saying, here's an example. One ad focused on you probably saw this one. It focused on all of the ways that abortion is already restricted in Kansas.
Yep.
And they were pointing out, they were emphasizing, in Kansas, you can't get an abortion past 22 weeks. And this is naturally aggravating to a progressive who wants to make abortion legal until the point of birth. But those ads aren't meant for those people. They're meant for the middle of the road folks who don't really give abortion much thought.
What it is, and I will denigrate my own state a little bit here, but it's low information voters who are conservatives, are Christians, but they're not obsessed with politics, which is a more healthy way to live your life, in all honesty. Most political people are not happy people. And they presented it as voting no would be the pro small government position. And so I've got an example while you were talking, Jacob. This is a text that I got, one of the dishonest texts. I tried to get this person to call me. I happened to be live doing my show, and I thought it would just be hilarious if I could get them to talk to me for 5 minutes. But of course they wouldn't do that. So here is the text I received the Thursday before the election. Hi, Thomas. I'm Lakshmi. What the? I'm Lakshmi, a volunteer. And then this
somebody
is the
flew
very
in
next
from San Francisco, probably.
What is a lot?
Sounds like
I don't even know what ethnicity that is.
It's like a name from a fairy tale. I just think of the character Mr. Shmee from Peter Pan.
Yeah, where do they get these people? Okay, hi Thomas. I'm Lakshmi, a volunteer. Moms will die in Kansas from not accessing health care, and voting yes August 2nd will allow for banning things like IVF. Voting no protects 19 laws that heavily restrict and regulate abortions. Will you be voting yes or no? And so that's the type of, I would say, dishonesty and flippant disregard for the truth and manipulation of voters that the average person was receiving. And I'm a cheeky guy who does news for a living, so I respond, call me and let's discuss. They say they won't call me, so I send back, well, I guess I'll have to let the mothers die then. But the average person probably does not have this evil brain that I have, and they just thought, wow, okay, I'm going to vote no.
Well, in Mississippi, there was an amendment on the ballot on abortion, and it failed 2-1. In other words, the pro-choice side won 2-1 in the state of Mississippi, one of the most pro-life states in the country. And the reason for that, this was like 10 years ago. The reason for that was because they successfully convinced a majority of Mississippians that if this bill passed, if this referendum passed, it would outlaw in vitro fertilization. They won the ad war. They won the optics war. They won the communications war. And the reason why they won is because, like you mentioned, 20 years ago in an abortion referendum, the churches would have showed up. Protestant and Catholic would have showed up in force. They would have put this on Christian radio, on conservative radio. This would have been at front and center. Nowadays, churches don't talk about anything really regarding politics. And it's not because they're fearful of losing their tax-exempt status, because I remember 20 years ago, they would talk about moral issues. You don't have to say, go vote for this politician, but they would discuss abortion and same-sex marriage. And now it's just they stay quiet on it. And that's why, you don't show up to fight, you're going to lose. That's at the end of the day, they won this fair and square. We can spend money if we want to spend money. We can talk about issues from the pulpit or on the street corner if we want to talk about certain issues.
Exactly. Yeah. The cultural right, the momentum that the cultural right, Jacob, as you and I have talked about off the air, they don't have that momentum anymore. What they had in like the 90s or even the early 2000s, the Christian right, the conservative, the backbone of the United States that overwhelmingly was, culturally Christian and proud of it, that they lost the momentum and they just don't know how to use it anymore. They're afraid of getting canceled, or they see that the left has already run away with the culture and has shifted the culture so hard against them that they're afraid of trying to speak out and use that power they once had, even though if they used it, they would gain majority support, because the vast majority of the country is still culturally conservative and mostly Christian for the most part. It could have worked. That's how, for example, I mean, as recently as 2008, it was that kind of coalition that saw California vote in favor of Prop 8, which banned gay marriage. In California, cultural conservatives made that happen.
In Maine, 2010, Maine voted to outlaw gay marriage. I think it was 2009, Maryland voted to outlaw gay marriage. And just going back to the numbers that I was pointing out earlier, there were 738,085 people who voted in the Kansas gubernatorial primary. That's both parties combined. 738,85. In the referendum, there were 922,323. So almost 200,000, that's about 185,000 more people voted on that referendum than even bothered to vote in the primary, which, even if you take out the confusing ballot and the lackluster support for the amendment among the pro-life crowd, it shows that Planned Parenthood and their allies were successful in turning out people to vote on this one issue. They showed up and all they did was vote on the amendment. They didn't vote for any Democrats, which goes back to the point that you're making, Tom, about them thinking that the abortion issue is going to push Democrats over the finish line. And I'm not so sure. I think the Kansas example kind of refutes that.
No, I think that you're right, Jacob. I think that there was a missed opportunity almost for the pro-death baby killers. They should have maybe had this coincide with the general election, when anybody can vote so long as they show up and have an ID, rather than in the primaries, because then you might have seen a little bit of a boost toward Laura Kelly. But I mean, I should have asked. I should have done interviews, but I try not to defecate where I eat, so to speak. And so I didn't want to mess with the protesters that were literally at one point outside where I live. So, but I should have asked, because they didn't strike me as the type that were like hardcore Democrats who vote in every primary and know the ins and outs of these strike me as low information millennial women, almost exclusively millennial women, who and some of them are like 50, some were not millennial, some were X and boomer, 50 and above. I couldn't understand why they were there, but it struck me as at low information voters being told, this is your opportunity to push back at Roe versus Wade at the state level. You can show the Supreme Court where they can shove their decision by doing this. And by having this one wedge issue, you're right, it didn't translate into a bunch of extra votes for Laura Kelly in the primary, and now there's no way it's going to transfer into extra votes for her in the fall. Now, there is a certain amount of evil genius. I mean, I as happy as I was, and I'm still happy to see Roe versus Wade overturned, there's a certain amount of evil genius to forcing Republicans to defend an issue that we'd all gotten weak at. Those muscles aren't really there anymore. We assumed that abortion was kind of dead, and we didn't have an opportunity to do anything about it because Roe versus Wade from 1972 or whatever set it all in stone. So we would make little 5% adjustments where we could and just kind of forget about it. And I think as a result, we've totally given the left the entire narrative. It's a very destructive thing. I do think that if there was some sort of national referendum on abortion on the ballot this November in all 50 states, you would see the Democrats probably keep the House and take the Senate and take more seats in the Senate. Fortunately, that will never happen. But if they manage to make abortion their number one issue, I do think it would help the left, unfortunately.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've noticed from a lot of Republicans with this Kansas initiative is, rather than focus on abortion and what the legislature actually wants to do, they were quibbling about semantics. So, for instance, they were arguing that, the Democrats or the progressives are misrepresenting this amendment, that this amendment actually doesn't outlaw abortion. All it does is it gives the right to the people to decide for themselves what they want for abortion. I'm sorry, but your average low information voter, they're just hearing a bunch of words and they're not comprehending. All they hear is, okay, so you want to outlaw abortion. That's basically what they're hearing. So they would actually behoove Republicans to come right out and say, yes, we want to outlaw abortion unless the woman's health or life is at risk, period. Like, don't nuance it. You don't have to get into semantics. It's like, yes,
that's right.
Basically what Planned Parenthood is saying, that's what we want, without the lies about in vitro fertilization. Like that stuff's not right. But as far as outlawing abortion unless a woman's health is at risk, yes, that's what we want to do, and that's what we're voting on. And if they did that, they would actually rally a pro-life base to show up and vote. Whereas I'll guarantee you there's a lot of people in Kansas that they weren't even aware of this thing being on the ballot, because they just heard a bunch of noise coming from all these text messages and ads that just tune out because no one from their camp actually reached out to them and said, hey, you've got a once in a generational opportunity now to actually make abortion illegal in this state.
I think that's right. And again, there's a lot of finger pointing that should be happening right now. After the 2020 election, or it must have been earlier, that must have been 2018, when Laura Kelly won in November of 2018, heads rolled at the Republican Party of Kansas. I happen to know for a fact that, well, I won't name drop the guy, but I know the guy who was the head of the party at that time. He was extremely drunk and resigned in disgrace by the next day after the November election. It was understood. We messed up. This is on us. We're all going to go away. And that's what happened. And frankly, they probably deserve that. There doesn't seem to be any type of introspection like that happening now. There was no reason for the Republicans to get excited because the Republican Party's messaging was, it's not even that big of a deal, Democrats. Don't worry about it. It might give us the ability to do something in the future if we feel like it. And so that was the messaging that Republicans received too. When the Republican messaging should have been, as you said, this is our once in a lifetime opportunity. We're going to have a massive conservative Christian majority in the legislature this upcoming legislative session. Let's use that for the first time to make sure that the rights of the unborn and the lives of the unborn are protected in this state. Instead, it's kind of like your grandfather's Republican Party, where we were all just kind of saying, well, you know, the subtext here is that if we can get our way, then maybe we'll save some babies. But don't say that too loud.
Exactly.
Don't say that.
Exactly.
That'll make them mad. And that's a failure. That's not how Trump won. That's not how we're going to win this November. That's not how we're going to get Congress back. That's not how we're going to win in 2024. Bold and brash, as Squidward would say, should be our marketing.
That's right. Yes. Because Jacob, you mentioned to me when we were talking about the abortion issue, you said that you saw a guest who was on Hannity talking in the aftermath of the abortion failure, like the next day, who was coping and basically saying, oh, the left was lying about this amendment. They were saying the amendment itself would ban abortion. That's not true. It would only make it possible for the legislature to ban abortion. And your message basically was, how dumb do they think voters are? Like, what else is going to happen if we pass this thing and make it possible for the legislature to ban abortion? Of course they're going to ban abortion. That's what it's for.
Because, like, if you're going to pass, so you want to pass this amendment, but you don't want to ban abortion, like, why do we need the amendment? Like, that's kind of like, well, what? Yeah, that just makes any sense.
Well, and frankly, the Kansas legislature, they really did good a couple times when it came to challenging Laura Kelly's unconstitutional COVID restrictions, and they've done a good job, but it's because they were forced. We basically held our legislators at a bayonet point and said, let me take off the mask or else. And that's what it took to get our state level Republicans into action. It was something unbelievable. So there's a real chance that this layabout Republic, especially Kansas, is one of these states, and I don't blame the people for this. They don't know any better. Where in western Kansas, you might have a state legislative district get 800 votes in the election. And so the guy's website, when you go to it, the Republican, it's going to say, small government, God, guns, and Bibles, Reagan, Ronald Reagan, Trump is still my president. And then when you look at their voting record, it matches the Democrats. And again, 800 votes in the middle of nowhere. It's easy for them to get reelected. So there's a real chance that that's another thing. There's not a real reason to be excited if you're a Republican in this state, because you know, if you're in the know, that when it comes time for rubber to meet the road, the legislature might sit on its hands. That's what they're best at in this state.
Oh, and you mentioned the lockdowns and the masks and stuff. One of those ads that one of the pro-abortion groups ran, actually, it mentioned government tyranny, as in government tyranny and not allowing women to kill their babies. But the images they showed was businesses shuttered because of COVID and people being forced to wear masks. So think about the visual that's sending to people. It's identifying. So a progressive who sees that, who supports masking and shutting down businesses during coronavirus, they don't like that strategy, but the ad isn't meant
wasn't
for them.
seen by them. The YouTube targeted ads. I mean, I think there was a reason why I was receiving all of these ads. It's because they think that I am a swing voter, and every single ad. I mean, it was actually it was confusing the first time I saw one. I had to sit there and wait a minute. I thought vote yes was the good one, because they sit there and they tell you The government is coming for your rights. They want to make it possible for the state to take away your medical freedom. We all saw how that happened in 2020. Do you really want the legislature to have the ability to do that again anytime they want? Respect small government. Respect conservative principles. Kill babies with us. That was how the ads were written.
It's an ingenious strategy. It's a great strategy. It's a marketing. It's
the only type of thing you can do in a rural state where you don't have institutional support. It's like Sean Hannity. Maybe if he had been there the night before telling his millions of nightly viewers what the matter actually was, what the language actually was, what the possibilities were if vote yes wins, maybe we would have had some more success. But instead, everybody's a Monday morning quarterback, or in this case, Wednesday morning quarterback, where they'll all sit there and assign blame, but nobody wants to take it to their own. And I would say that maybe I have some blame. I have a medium-sized website. I don't know how many Kansas readers we even have. We're a national website, but you gotta assign some blame to the party, to the Republican establishment. You don't get to sit there on Wednesday morning and talk about how awful it is that this was allowed to happen when Monday night you didn't do anything to help.
Well, I think a lot of the Republican establishment, they're very ambiguous on abortion to begin with. Like deep down inside, you probably remember, I think it was an Ohio congressman back in 2018. He was called on a hot mic bashing pro-lifers. He was bashing, I don't remember, it was somewhere in the Midwest, but he was bashing pro-lifers. He got called and he retired in 2018. He was one of the Republicans in 2018 that just decided that he wasn't going to run for re-election. And I think deep down inside, a lot of these folks, they're Republican because they're pro-business. They want lower taxes and they want to make money. And the abortion stuff, they see that as an unfortunate alliance with pro-lifers. And so they don't really care about that issue. And that's why people who actually do care about the issue, churches, Christians, have to get organized on this issue and focus.
I've got some gossip for you to help you with that. So you're right. Mike Pompeo was, of course, our U.S. rep for a couple years there. Then he left to go work for Trump. Actually, he was the CIA director. Then he got to go be the State Department guy, the Secretary of State for a couple years. And now it is very, very clear to anybody who pays attention that Mike Pompeo is running for president in 2024. He hasn't announced it yet, but it's pretty obvious. And I was watching Pompeo's speech recently, which I know Ukraine war is very divisive and not why he brought me in, but he was talking about the Ukraine war. And he said something in his speech that just kind of left me as a Kansan and a guy who is used to this guy saying, fellow Kansans, Kansas is going to be great. That's Pompeo. Well, not anymore. He said, and I know very well from the time I spent in Kansas how important wheat is. And so this guy who is presenting himself as a true blue conservative from the flyover state of Kansas, now it's reduced to the time I spent in Kansas, just like the time he spent in West Point or the time he worked in oil. It's just it's a bookmark in his life. It's a couple chapters in the biography he's planning. That's how all, or at least most, of the Republican establishment views their voters. It is an unfortunate but necessary means to get where they want to be, whether that's low taxes or president of the United States. He's going to pretend to be one of us for a few years, pretend to care about the things we care about, and then when it's time to go on to greener pastures, cut and run. Who cares about Kansas anymore? Sold his house, has no ties to the city. I know people used to be able to get Pompeo on the phone. They haven't talked to him since 2018.
Wow, that's just sad. It's really sad that it's basically just completely reject the state of their home state like that. They see the shiny glitz and glamour of Washington D.C. They fall in love with it.
Yep. And again, we served our purpose. And I think that's how the majority of people look at the pro-life movement. They will serve their purpose in getting me elected, and then they will shut up for another 4 years. I think that's the probably the standard view if you are a Mitch McConnell Republican.
A Mitch McConnell Republican. That's such a great way to put it, because they honestly, that is the epitome. Along with the pro-impeachment Republicans that are still around in the country, that is the best way to categorize a Republican who deserves to lose no matter the cost. All right. Is there anything else you want to say about Kansas, Tom?
Oh boy, my poor state. Well, I would just say, and I know that some of the Monday morning quarterbacking is over by time this airs, but anybody left or right telling you that this is somehow proof that the conservatives are going to lose in November and the Republicans are all going to be doomed because of the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade, it is, as the kids say, cope. They had one little thing that they could call a victory out of last Tuesday, and it was a confusing ballot that was outspent 2-1 and had no institutional support from the right in a flyover state. They lost everything else. We're still waiting on pins and needles to see what's going to happen with Joe Kent. If he wins, that's every single impeachment Republican, as you said, that was up for re-election is now not going to be there no matter what. That it was a massive, unprecedented win for Republicans, I would say even in Kansas, because it's looking like Laura Kelly is going to be packing her bags in a few months. Don't let them hold this one state. As much as I love my home state, don't let them hold that up as a victory. It's the only thing they have.
A fellow distributor of white pills, if ever I have met one. I love it. I am on the same page as you, my man. A temporary setback with the abortion vote and nothing else. Kobach is going to be back in a statewide office. We're going to have a Republican as governor of Kansas again, and they are going to be BTFO'd in November again, despite this mirage of victory they've created themselves. This cope, as you have said. And we are going to go ahead and wrap this episode up here now. Tom, if you want to go ahead and maybe close out and once again plug any websites, social media where people can follow you, and maybe tease some of the latest stuff you guys may have coming up at Valiant News.
Oh, I will think of what I can tease. You can find me at valiantnews.com. That's where we do some of the, in my humble opinion at least, some of the best and most comprehensive journalism you're ever going to see. You can find me personally at Real Tom Pappert on Twitter, at Real God Emperor Trump on Gab, and on Truth, I'm just at Tom Pappert. Now, for something special, I can't exactly say when it's going to drop, but we've got a big culture war story going on about Minecraft, of all things. There's something fascinating going on with how they are playing with free speech or lack thereof, and what their community, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag. We'll leave it at that. But Minecraft hate speech kerfuffle coming up at valiantnews.com. Keep an eye out.
Ooh, epic gamers should definitely tune in for that one. Minecraft is super important because, as we all know, the one quick way to get out of, accusations of hate speech or radical political speech is to just say, always attach in Minecraft to the end of the sentence. So if you ever say, it would be great if we overthrew this evil deep state in Minecraft.
Minecraft.
It would be great. I love it. All right, fantastic. We will be keeping an eye out for that breaking Minecraft culture war story, Tom. Thank you so much again for joining us, man. It's always great to have you on, and you are welcome back on the show at any time, as you already know.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's been great being here, and thank you, Jacob. You guys are scholars and gentlemen, and I look forward to being back.
All right. Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. Anytime.
Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you guys, as always, for tuning in to the latest episode here of The Right Take. As always, be sure to follow us for all of our latest content at our website, righttakepodcast.com. The full list of podcast platforms and social media websites where we are available at righttakepodcast.com/subscribe. And as always, guys, if ever you are feeling oh so generous and want to continue supporting the great work that we do here, righttakepodcast.com/support. We'll talk to you next week, guys.